In August 2017, a deadly crackdown by Myanmar's army on Rohingya Muslims sent hundreds of thousands fleeing for safety. Attacked, maimed, raped, killed, the Rohingyas fled for their lives, plunging into the seas to get away from their own military. At least 900,000, if not more, sought refuge in Bangladesh that opened its doors to the traumatized population. Aung San Suu Kyi, the face of human rights in Myanmar, looked the other way. She did not say a word in support of the Rohingyas and even insisted that there was no ethnic cleansing of the Myanmar Muslim minority. In the process, Aung San Suu Kyi lost support across the world that recognized the crime as inhuman and grievous. The UN General Assembly passed a resolution in support of the Rohingyas. The UN Secretary General described them as the most discriminated people in the world. The International Criminal Court took up the issue, directed Myanmar to protect the Rohingyas. But despite the global condemnation, Myanmar remains unrelenting, and the Rohingyas remain refugees, living in overcrowded camps without hope, people without citizenship and rights.
So our guest today is Dr. Maung Zarni. He is from a Buddhist Burmese family. He is in exile now in Europe. He was born, studied, worked in Myanmar as a politician, as a scholar. He's formed the Free Burma Coalition and was busy with that and led a major campaign against the military dictatorship between 1995 and 2004. And he has since, and more so in recent years, been waging a war against genocide. He has got a genocide watch. He has taken a very, very strong position and led a very strong campaign for justice for the Rohingyas. He has written a paper on the slow burning genocide of Myanmar's Rohingyas, and we are so glad to have you with us. So you yourself have been, of course, as I pointed out, struggling and campaigning for the rights of the Rohingyas. You have led a movement, really. You've been to Bangladesh. You have even seen the rehabilitation of the Rohingyas when they fled Myanmar. How do you see the situation today?
How do I see the Rohingya situation? Well, initially, I was quite hopeful that there was a shift in, public consciousness, especially within the new generation, 20-somethings, post-teenage, early 30s, the celebrities, artists, activists, students, and whatnot. A shift in favor of embracing Rohingya as our own people who have been wronged for decades by the Burmese military, that had adopted unofficially anti-Muslim sentiment, Islamophobia, as a state policy, really. Yeah, and then, but my early optimism has not been borne out by the turn of events over the last a month or so, because the country has plunged into unprecedented level of violence by the military, counter-violence or resistance, from the society itself. And so we have in Burma today essentially an existential crisis, existential conflict between, on the one hand, the Burmese military, who sees themselves as the guardian, in quotes, of the nation, and puts themselves above the law, above the society, above the constitution. And then on the on one hand, 50 million Burmese people of different faiths and ethnic backgrounds, and even political persuasions, and so no single population in Burma can feel any optimism or hope as things plunge into this abyss of what the Washington Post is calling anarchy. Actually, it's not anarchy, it's a state-sponsored terrorism against the entire society that disagrees and dissent from the military. So in that regard, Rohingyas are no exception. If the mainstream Buddhist society do not have any prospect for freedom from the current level of repression and oppression, the Rohingyas do not have any prospect for repatriation or rehabilitation or to Burma.
That's quite tragic. I'm going to come back to them, but I'm going to take a point from what you just said. Isn't it a little exciting, though, that you had this level of dissent and protest after such a long time? And the fact is that it just came suddenly, and all the people and the young people in particular were in the streets. So that's some seeds of something, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But I should have said, the popular consciousness was shifted in two respects or two aspects. One is what I just mentioned, the embracing of Rohingya as our own people, calling them, by their own name, and also publicly saying that we want Rohingya back, and then, issuing public apologies by student unions as well as individuals and on different social media platforms. But the other one is that the so-called Burmese Spring. It was early summer when that happened. The early March or late February is early summer for us, as in India as well. And so we don't really have a spring. And so it's the wrong metaphor to use. It's an early summer revolution, and in Burmese, it's called Nueu Revolution. And that, that revolution entails two different things. One is the society completely having a consensus after 70 years since the independence from Britain in 1948, that the military is the common enemy of every community, irrespective of race or faith or creed. And then the other one, more progressively and forward-looking, is the younger generation demanding that the inclusivity or the inclusion of everyone that was born in Burma or that considers Burma their home be granted full and equal status as citizen.
But one negative, now that I've made you list out the positives, is that earlier you had an opposition face and an opposition leader in Aung San Suu Kyi. And then when she came to power, she did not take a position on the Rohingyas. She did not take a position on justice, on inclusiveness, all that you've been talking about. So, and now she's again at the receiving end from the military, and obviously not in a position to get back to her old status. So you have an opposition protest movement without a leader. How does that play out?
Well, I think I prefer the opposition movement with a positive forward-looking vision, which everyone embraces, or majority of the resistors embrace this vision, to an opposition movement with the leader that has taken the wrong side, that has defended the perpetrators of the genocide, as opposed to speaking out and standing up for the most persecuted community in our country. And they remind you, Aung San Suu Kyi did not stay silent. It's not that Aung San Suu Kyi did not take sides, in favor of Rohingya. She took the side of the killers.
Right. So now we are in a position where Myanmar, at least, is concerned, is that you have the military back in again. You have the protesters and the entire society that stood up with so much courage and resilience, actually on the receiving end being pushed back. You have no opposition and no opposition leader. And then you have a whole community, which is now refugees and staying in countries that don't really want them and staying in real dismal poverty. So while the genocide to that extent is ended, but now we are in a new chapter of complete exploitation and misery. How does this all pan out in the immediate future?
Well, I mean, let's speak of like here and now. That we have a situation far worse than any one of us had ever thought was possible. And that situation is the following: the military is, you know, uh, restricting access to medical oxygen to the, uh, the Burmese civilian public that, by and large, are opposed to military, staying in on power, or like you playing the most dominant role in politics. So there's a, there's an argument to be made here that the Burmese military today is, by intention and as an act of strategy, depriving the public of medical oxygen. Yeah. So the oxygen is generated in different private factories or government factories or whatnot. But the flow of oxygen is exclusively in the hands of the generals. They have issued orders to oxygen producers to only supply the oxygen to military control public hospitals. But the public hospitals and health sector has completely collapsed because thousands of healthcare workers initiated this movement called civil disobedience, refusing to work in anything that is in the hands of the military. So we, we are now today the country with the third largest COVID infection rate in the world. Yeah. So we have a situation that is, far worse and deadlier than what India had just gone through. Just think about it. Yeah. There's no public health prevention measures put in place by the military. The military is busy killing people and denying the public of medical oxygen. So this is the situation that no one, whether pro or against the military, has ever imagined. But the generals are doing it. And so there are voices that are coming up, raising the question: is the military, committing a genocide against the, civilian population that has shown so much anti-military sentiments?
Now, you're based outside, you have traveled the world. What if, when the protests were on, and I'm not talking about the region because in the region we are all small players, but talking of the big powers that are, if they had taken a different position, as it were, there might have been a different outcome? Or do
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think, when Auschwitz, the largest death and labor camp
Yes.
in history, on recorded history, was closed, January 1945, and then the Nazi regime collapsed the following spring. The world leaders made this pledge, not just to the Jewish victims and other victims of Nazi genocide, but to the entire world, the entire humanity. Never again. Yeah. And we will never let, the Holocaust or any type of genocide happen again. But, if the Security Council, that is run anti-democratically by 5 world powers, and so this body of 5 permanent veto wielders do not draw the line, yeah, the moral or the spiritual line in running in the way the world is run. Of course, the criminals, for them, it would be the sky is the limit. They would do anything. But but they didn't
take a position. They didn't take a position. They did not support.
They did not take a position in any war, in any genocides, save 1 or 2, like Rwanda, or like the authorization to invade Iraq for the first time in 1992. This world do not have a moral or intellectual leader as such that says this is a line we will not across as a world community of almost 200 UN member states. Yeah. And then, and so, yeah, of course, it's easier to blame China. Yeah. And I do that all the time. But China's not alone in acting very irresponsibly. When it comes to Israel, the United States give, Israel a blank check. Israel is today considered an apartheid state by the United Nations. Apartheid was declared in the case of South Africa, a crime against humanity. So we've got criminal states being given, protection at the Security Council. Yeah. So Burma today is protected by both China and Russia. Russia sells, these two countries make up 85% of Burma's armed purchases, right? And then so, like,
Yes.
we live in the world where wolves are tasked to look after the chickens. And so
Yes.
this is not the first or last genocide that we will face. There will be more.
Oh, wow. So we are really now looking at a very bleak prospect for Myanmar, and even more bleak, or as bleak, for the Rohingyas, who are going to now remain refugees for a long time, right? That's how you see it.
Yes, that's why, like the Bangladesh, as a Burmese and as a rights activist, I'm thankful to the Bangladeshi government. Yeah, they have done more for the Rohingyas than any other government. Because you've got, in India, you've got a tiny population of Rohingya refugees in a country of 1.4 billion. Yeah, and allowing, let's just say, 20,000 Rohingyas to have a decent human life. It's not going to make any difference, for the entire Indian civilization or society as such. They pose no threat. They can even be contributing members of a large Indian society. But, never mind, they are being subjected. Their camps are burned down. They've been, like, jailed left and right. There have been scores of Rohingyas having been deported back to Burma through northeast Indian provinces. And so this is a very, very sad and troubling situation all around. We do not have any moral or intellectual leadership coming from anywhere. New Delhi, Washington, the Moscow, Beijing, Berlin, anywhere, you name it. And so we are, a morally and intellectually rudderless world.
But you will continue with your mission and your campaign.
Well, I will keep doing what I'm doing, because activism is not a job. It's not, for me. Okay, of course, I get the funding and support and whatnot, but this isn't a job. This, being an activist is a volition. You choose to lead a life that is in accord with what you consider moral and intellectual principles. And so, win or lose, we, for activists, we only have one way to go, one direction to go. That is to keep pressing ahead with our activist work.
Right. Thank you so much. This was very interesting and very necessary. So all the best. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Seema.
Thank you.
Okay.